Earlier this week, on Sunday night, I had a dream in which I knew I was asleep. I was stood outside of my house in torrential rain at night and thought I needed to get inside in order to wake up. I approached the front door and placed my knuckles onto the door window ready to knock. I knew that my next action would bring me one step closer to consciousness. The moment I knocked on the door, the thudding sound of the knock was so loud, so frightening and so real that it woke me from my sleep. I jumped up immediately and listened out for a further knock at the door. I was roasting hot, sweating profusely and my heart was beating so hard, I don't think I would have been able to tell the difference between a knock at the door and my thudding heartbeat. After I came to my senses and realized that the possibility of the door knocking at the exact moment of dreaming it is incredibly low, I fell back to sleep. Monday, the very following night, I had the same dream. Right back outside the front of the house in the pouring rain again, intensely staring at the house. I slowly walked to the front door, this time it was open. I walked in and went straight into the kitchen. I opened the cutlery drawer and pulled out the largest meat knife I have. I looked into my reflection through the blade of the knife. If you stare directly into the reflection of your eyes for long enough, eventually it will hit you that someone is looking at you. You know it's your reflection, but for just a second, you forget and become self-conscious, as if it's somebody else behind your reflection's eyes. It didn't take a second of looking at my reflection through the blade to realize that somebody else was looking back. The moment I realized it was somebody else wearing my grin in the reflection, I slammed the cutlery drawer shut. Again, I shot up out of bed. The sound of the metal clanging in the drawer as it abruptly closed was so defined and so crystal clear, it couldn't have been a dream. Really spooked this time, I went downstairs into the kitchen. I was half asleep and had to check. I opened the cutlery drawer. I was relieved to find the knife still in the drawer. I closed it and went back to bed. It took a little longer this time, but I fell asleep. Tuesday night, my dream started with that grin in the reflection. From the look in his eyes, I could tell that the man in the reflection knew he was looking back at someone confused and scared. I found myself looking into the reflection of the knife, already in my hand, while stood outside of my house in the rain. The front door was open again. I walked into the house, directly up the stairs and into my bedroom. I looked at the bed and saw someone sleeping in it. It was me. I knew what I was going to do, but also knew that I couldn't stop myself. Instead, I kept thinking over and over again, wake up. My emotions were both in two extremes at once. I was terrified, but at the same time I was thrilled and excited to kill. Wake up. I shot right out of bed and stood up. I was absolutely drenched in sweat, roasting hot, but relieved to find nobody stood in front of me with a knife. It took a few seconds to realize that I was gripping something tight in my hand. I knew what it was even before I looked down at it and saw my reflection in it. It was the meat knife, and this time the reflection in it looked terrified. I don't sleep anymore. Perhaps you have heard the legend of the supposed holy hour that occurs on certain days of the year, Christmas, Easter, Good Friday, November 1st, and the 1st of both February and August, each day between 7 and 8 a.m., not including daylight savings time, mind you, because it is a human invention and supernatural entities do not observe it. When you were a kid, this was the hour in which you probably opened Christmas presents and started tearing apart your Easter basket after dragging your parents out of bed, and much to your parents' chagrin refused to eat anything but leftover Halloween candy from the day before for breakfast. However, more than likely you had never gone into a darkened room in preparation for this ritual. However, perhaps you've heard others speak of it. Go into a room with a mirror, preferably one without windows, between 7 and 8 a.m. on any one of the dates listed above. You do not have to perform this ritual alone. If you have any friends, you may in fact want them to come in with you to help you perform specific tasks outlined that are difficult to do in the dark. Important: the only light in this ritual must come from either a candle or a lighter, some tiny, flickering flame. Save for this light, you must be in total darkness, otherwise there is a strong possibility that you won't see anything, hence the suggestion that you perform this in a room without windows. However, it all depends on your own sensitivity to the paranormal. When my friend performed this ritual last November 1st, we had to shut all the doors in the hallway first because the light from the door crack kept distracting him. Make sure that you perform this ritual in comfortable clothing. You want to avoid any unnecessary discomfort. Once inside this room, close the door and light your candles and/or your lighter. These flames must remain lit until the end of the ritual, although I know of people who have chickened out and blown the flames out, which instantly ends it and generally leaves them wallowing in their own cowardice for days on end afterwards. You may have your friends hold or light the candles or lighter if desired, as long as the flame is reflected in the mirror. Now begin chanting some Christian prayer. Anyone will do, even the sinner's prayer, on the back of those chick tracts, as long as it mentions God, Jesus, or the Holy Ghost at least once, as you stare into the mirror. It must be the same prayer and, again, the number of times you need to chant this prayer varies depending on your own sensitivity to the paranormal, but generally 20 times is more than enough. My friend chose Our Father, and he needed to chant it 15 or 16 times. When you have chanted for long enough, one of your flames will flare and then change color. Ours turned red, but I've heard of flames turning blue, white, and even green and lavender before. A few seconds later, an image will appear in the mirror of the Archangel Michael. He looks a lot like the usual images of Christian angels, only he has this really nasty burn mark on the left side of his face. Also, he has really deep-set eyes. Bow to Michael. Again, it is important to make sure you don't accidentally put out your flames unless you wish to end the ritual. After you bow to him, Michael will ask you if you are entirely certain that you want to perform this ritual. I can't really describe the voice, but it's not the sort of voice you'd expect an archangel to have. It's kind of scratchy and overall not very pleasant to listen to, and he has a faint accent of indeterminable origin. After you answer yes, Michael will explain the conditions of the ritual. He will ask you 7 questions, and if you answer at least 4 of them right, he will either allow or a conversation with a deceased loved one or give a living one immortality. However, if you answer 3 or fewer of them correctly, he will slit your throat and you will die right then and there. I'll admit that I actually do not remember any of the 7 riddles from when my friend did this, but I do remember that they were rather arcane, i.e., not the type of riddles you would find in a riddle book, and he seemed to be fully aware of this. Also, if I remember correctly, each one consisted of 7 words. My friend never did well at riddles, so you can imagine that he didn't get any right, which seemed to amuse the hell out of Michael, as by the end of the ritual he had this big, terrifying Joker-like smile on his face. After you are finished answering the riddles, you only get 1 try at each, but he lets you think. Michael gives you the score. Again, if you answer 3 or fewer right, he smites you. While he smites you, he says something in the angel language, Enochian, I believe it's called, and you're left writhing on the floor in agony. My friend was screaming his head off when the ritual was over, and he started speaking in tongues. It was horrible and I'm currently in therapy for this. Really fucking horrifying. But I digress. Anyway, the candles all went out, and the lighter he had me hold died at the exact same time. I left the room feeling dizzy, and passed out on my bed in my own vomit. Strange thing is I woke up 8 hours later and went into the bathroom I performed the ritual in, and found no trace of my dead friend in there. Strange, I live alone and all my doors and windows were locked. There was no sign of anyone having broken into my apartment. The landlady was on vacation, and no matter how hard I looked in the bathroom I could not find a single trace of my friend's blood anywhere. A few days later, I got a call from his roommate, asking about my friend. According to his roommate, my friend disappeared on Halloween night and hadn't been seen at all since. He had called all around, asking my friend's parents, siblings, aunt, uncle, people like the guy at the convenience store where my friend bought his cigarettes, and even his old teachers from grade school if they knew anything about his whereabouts, only to get a resounding no. He decided to call me because apparently I was the only person out of the people both he and my friend knew that he hadn't called yet. So I told him exactly what happened, down to my friend's body mysteriously disappearing. He didn't believe me, and reported me to the police, but, when the police came to investigate, they did not find any trace of my friend either, not even his DNA. It's almost like he never came over my house and instead chose to fall off the face of the earth and leave his friends behind. On a side note, I've heard that someone in fact, by some miracle, did get all of the riddles right, and they wished for the immortality of whoever. However, the next day their loved one was not alive. They, much like my friend, were mysteriously spirited away, only this time on the wall of their room there was a message in some mysterious language, written in blood. Perhaps only God and the Archangel Michael know what has become of the two of them. I must have been 6 or 7 when I lived in Lebanon. The country was ravaged by war at the time, and murders were common and frequent. I remembered during a particularly vicious era, when the bombings rarely stopped, I would stay at home sitting in front of my television watching a very, very strange show. It was a kids' show that lasted about 30 minutes and contained strange and sinister images. To this day I believe it was a thinly veiled attempt on the part of the media to use scare tactics to keep kids in place, because the moral of every episode revolved around very uptight ideologies, stuff like, bad kids stay up late, bad kids have their hands under the covers when they sleep, and bad kids steal food from the fridge at night. It was very weird, and in Arabic to top it off. I didn't understand much of it, but for the most part, the images were very graphic and comprehensive. The thing that stuck with me the most, however, was the closing scene. It remained much the same in every episode. The camera would zoom in on an old, rusted, closed door. As it got closer to the door, strange and sometimes even agonizing screams would become more audible. It was extremely frightening, especially for children's programming. Then a text would appear on the screen in Arabic reading, "That's where bad kids go." Eventually, both the image and the sound would fade out, and that would be the end of the episode. About 15 or 16 years later I became a journalistic photographer. That show had been in my mind all my life, popping up in my thoughts sporadically. Eventually, I'd had enough, and decided to do some research. I finally managed to uncover the location of the studio where much of that channel's programming had been recorded. Upon further research and eventually traveling on site, I found out it was now desolate and had been abandoned after the big war ended. I entered the building with my camera. It was burnt out from the inside. Either a fire had broken out or someone had wanted to incinerate all of the wooden furniture. After a few hours of cautiously making my way into the studio and snapping pictures, I found an isolated out-of-the-way room. After having to break through a few old locks and managing to break the heavy door open, I remained frozen in the doorway for several long minutes. Traces of blood, feces, and tiny bone fragments lay scattered across the floor. It was a small room, and an extremely morbid scene. What truly frightened me, though, what made me turn away and never want to come back, was the bolted, caged microphone hanging from the roof in the middle of the room.